Now, seeking to tighten Nigeria's economic belt is the central bank, which has announced a reduction in a bank's loan-to-deposit ratio to 50%. This decision prompts discussions on the nation's interest rate trajectory, compounded by the recent CPI data that has indicated a 28-year high in inflation. Adding fuel to the fire are the increases of petrol prices for the nation. Joining us to discuss these measures in greater detail is SSA macroeconomist for Absa, Ridle Markus. Thank you so much for your time, Ridle. An absolute pleasure.
Good afternoon.
All right, Ridle, maybe we can start off by just seeing, as of today, where are we in terms of the impacts of those reforms that were implemented in Nigeria, really trying to fix some of the things that had been going on there for a long time?
Yeah, so thank you. So the impact continues to reverberate through the economy, and you can see very clearly how the currency is weakened from less than 500 a year ago to the US dollar to 1,200 or just short of 1,200 naira to the US dollar. And along with that, we obviously had the fuel subsidy removal. We've seen our fuel prices have, for example, increased. Now, the subsidy removal specifically impacted on petrol prices, and those are around 163% higher from a year ago. We know that government, of course, in the middle of or second half of last year, brought back some part of the subsidy, and hence the increase has not been significant since then. But of course, the broader impact of the removal of the subsidy and the FX reforms have been fairly visible in the inflation numbers. And we know that inflation increased from less than 30% not too long ago and is now at 33.2%. And we expect inflation to continue to increase. The unfortunate reality for the average consumer is that even food price inflation stands at around 40%, and prices just continue to increase. President Tinubu did warn that it's going to be painful, but of course, the real impact being felt by so many millions of poor people in Nigeria is a frightening reality, I would say, at this point.
Let's talk about some of the, reforms that the central bank is trying to put in now to also counter inflation. The first one, maybe we can start to speak about the interest rate trajectory, but also then let's talk about also the loan to deposit ratio, which seems to be, making news throughout the world. I'm wondering if that is something that central banks often reach out to when they are trying to curb inflation.
So, of course, the central bank is moving towards an inflation targeting regime. And within that, you've got various instruments that you can potentially target. Now, the popular one so far has, of course, been the policy rate and then also the cash reserve requirement. But now the Central Bank of Nigeria, not for the first time, has also focused on reducing the loan to deposit ratio. Reducing that ratio just means that banks will not have as much available to lend to their clients. Now, that was reduced by 15 percentage points. But we also saw recently, just last month, that the cash reserve ratio has also been increased from, I think it was around 32.5% to 45%, while the policy rate was increased by 600 basis points. So the central bank is trying to pull out all stops here to drain liquidity and to ensure that inflation is reined in and inflation expectations are being reined in. And that might mean that they may have to hike the policy rate even further. We think that another 200 basis points is very likely in a monetary policy rate or hike at least in a policy rate at the next meeting in May. But again, they can use so many different instruments trying to reduce the liquidity in the banking system, trying to prevent inflation from rising further.
Right. Is this tightening bound to impact the growth trajectory of Nigeria?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think the higher living costs, and the living cost basically just looking at the higher inflation and the higher lending rates just make it so much more difficult for individuals to spend money, and they have to really tighten the belt. And so and that's the same for businesses. They have to tighten the belts too. So that just makes it makes the growth or the rebound in growth just slightly more tricky for Nigeria. Now, we think that after growing at 2.9% last year, that Nigeria should be able to get to 3.2%. I see the IMF thinks 3.3% is likely. But given where the population growth rate is of 2.6%, you probably need higher growth rate. At one point, before 2015, Nigeria was growing, constantly in excess of 4%. And I think that they would love to get back to those kind of levels. But I think the first priority here is to get through these reforms and then ensure more sustainable reforms and maintain that high growth over a longer period, not just from the oil sector, but also the non-oil sector.
Is it possible at all to track how long it may take for these reforms to work their way through the system? We've seen around the world that inflation has actually taken longer than anticipated to really move through, and it's also become stickier than what we anticipated. Are these also risks for Nigeria?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, of course, it's not helpful when global geopolitical tensions causes oil prices to spike, or tight global supply causes oil prices to spike. That doesn't help. It doesn't help when there's adverse weather conditions locally or a rising insecurity that makes agriculture output more difficult, and it impacts on food security. So, the drivers are so many, but the reality is that, while some of these factors are unpredictable, it could take anything from, 1 to 2 years before you see the real positive impact of these reforms. And I would think that it's probably more 2 years to 3 years before you see the real full impact or positive impact of these reforms coming through. So, it does mean that some pain initially will be seen. But again, as I said earlier, Nigeria and President Tinubu and his administration is open for more sustainable growth over the longer term. But that will it will take some hard work to get there.
Well, we'll be watching this one very closely. Ridle, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. That was Sub-Saharan Africa macroeconomist for Absa CIB, Ridle Markus.